Okay, so welcome to the optical projector activity. What you should have received is a sheet of cardstock with the optical projector printed. Essentially what we're going to be doing is combining origami type principles with cutting. Technically cutting is not allowed in origami, but we're going to essentially make a holder for a lens, a transparency, and a flashlight with this special set of cuts. And then you should have received a small transparency set which has these 4 copies of the transparencies. Also, you should receive a lens and a flashlight. For this activity, you'll need to have your own scissors and tape. If you don't have tape, you can use a stapler. At the end, what you'll be producing is something that looks like this. So this is a V-groove holder which has a slidable holder for the transparency, so you can adjust the distance of the transparency relative to the lens. So this is the flashlight, and then the lens will be sitting in your V-groove holder, and so you're going to be adjusting the distance between the transparency and the lens, and thereby changing the imaging properties of this system. So let's talk about how we're going to make this lens, or this transparency holder. So the sheet has 4 different sections, A, B, C, and D. And what you're going to be doing is you're going to be following the instructions that are listed here, where it's going to be telling you to do a series of cuts and a series of tapes. So the first step is to cut this into 4 different segments along the long vertical lines. So we're going to first cut this one in half along line D. And so you want to be relatively accurate with your cuts and cut these straight along the line all the way the length of the paper. So I've now created my segment D, and notice that at the bottom of D you should also cut the long horizontal line that goes across the solid line all the way to the other side. So this section D, this is going to form the top part, which is going to hold the lens and the transparency. Then I'm going to also cut out part C. Part C is just instructions. And we did it this way because we wanted you to be able to have these final 2 steps of the instructions without having to turn over the transparency to read them, because you're going to be combining these together. And then you're going to cut B and A. So we've now created 4 segments, A, B, C, and D. And for A, we're going to cut in the middle here so that we separate this out. So we now have the segment A, we have the segment B, and we have the segment D. A is going to be what we use to hold the transparency. B is what we're going to use for the back side, which is going to be able to support the system. And D is going to be the main one that's going to hold the lens and the transparency. So the instructions, so the first step was to cut horizontally along the 3 solid lines that were below and the one above. The second one is make rectangle A with a vertical cut, so I've done that. And then it explains what the sheets A, B, and D are going to be for. The next step is to fold strip A in half along the middle. So we're going to fold this in the center so that we create this V shape. After we folded it in the center with the text facing out, we're going to cut a slit along this rectangle in black. So we're just going to take our scissors and make a cut to about where the end of the black is. So this is going to now create a slit, and this is what we're going to use to hold the transparency. The next step is that we're going to fold the text inward, and then we're going to fold, there's this dotted line, we're going to fold this one inward again. And we're going to crease all folds with our fingernails. And actually, now that I look at it, I said that backwards. So we want the text outwards, and we want these folds to go inwards. So you can fold it like this and form a rooftop with part A facing outwards. So it's going to look like this, where we crease these. And then this can stand on its own and form a rooftop shape, like so. Okay. We're going to set part A aside. Now we're going to do the transparency. So the transparency, we have 4 copies, and it says follow the instructions along the transparencies. It says cut along the solid black lines to form squares with flaps. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work with the pattern that has the blue square and the arrows. This is drawn to scale, so this set of squares, the blue is 0.25 inches and then the red is 0.5 inches. So I'm going to cut along the black solid line and cut out this square from the transparency. Okay, so now I have this transparency square, and this is what I'm going to be working with. So I'm setting the other parts aside. I need to cut these solid black lines here so that I can get this to hold. So we're going to create something where these parts of the transparency are going to be held by part A, the part that we had just cut out here. So once I've cut this, I should be able to slide in my transparency into the holder A and push this through. Now you may have to wiggle and pull it from the bottom to get it to fit. And once you get it to fit, you'll need to bend this back into a rooftop shape. So just wiggle it a bit and play with it. And once you've done that, you've now gotten something to hold the transparency. So now the transparency is being held by the paper frame A. Okay, now we're ready to move on to step number 4. So in step number 4, we're going to be working with sheet D. We want to fold very carefully for sheet D. So this part I'm going to do a little bit slower to make sure that I get my folds correctly. So we want to fold along this dotted line first. So we fold this in half. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually just look on this side for where the dotted line is, and I'm going to crease according to the dotted line. So if your cut when the first step was very good, the sides will line up, but if you cut less than accurately, it won't line up as well. So it's better to fold along the crease directly like so. Okay, so now that I've folded along the crease with the text facing out, I'm ready to cut out these 3 black rectangles. So there's this rectangle here, which is where the lens goes, and there are these rectangles at the side. So I'm going to cut along the black rectangle. So I folded it in half, and I'm now going to cut along this rectangle to get the lens holder region free. I can open it up, and then I can cut this tiny slit here, and I can cut this tiny slit here. Okay, so I've now cut out that first rectangle. The second rectangle, or in the third one, these are the 2 edges. I'm going to take a shortcut and cut them both at the same time. This cut doesn't need to be perfect, so that's why I can do this cut, both of them together. So I cut along and I remove out these 2 black rectangles. These are going to be the flap region that allows us to tuck part A underneath part D. Okay, so I'm going to throw those scraps aside. And then the next part in step 4, so now we're on to step 5. So now we want to fold part D into a double mountain shape. The very center region is going to fold inward. This is going to be the bottom of the V holder. These next dotted lines we want to fold outwards. So I'm going to hold it, again, I'm going to crease it so that I can see the crease that I'm making. I can see that it's straight, so I can see where I'm folding along the dotted line. And I fold and I make this flat. I flip it over and I do the same. So now I have these 2 1/4 and 3/4 lines folded to make this mountaintop shape. So I have the first part of the mountaintop, and then the last part is I need to fold these bottom pieces or these edge pieces outwards. So I'm going to carefully crease them and fold and crease these folds. So I created these things pointing outwards. And similarly on this side, I'm going to crease these like so. So now I should have this mountaintop shape, So it looks a little bit like the capital letter M, but I have these tiny flaps at the very bottom of it. And so now I'm done with sheet number D. So I've created the folds. The next step is step 6, where I'm going to tape or staple or glue this mountain-shaped D to the back of this sheet B. That's the reason we have to cut out sheet C, is because the instructions on it are no longer going to be visible. So I'm going to tape this to the edge. Now the way that the dimensions are set up, everything is exactly to scale. So you'll notice that if you put the corner of this, so you can flatten it a little bit, if you line up the corner of one sheet with the corner of the next sheet, you can tape that as if you're wrapping a gift. You can tape that corner. Next, when you do the other side, you can also line up the corner with the corner and tape that. So I'm going to skip those 2 steps and imagine that I've already taped it. So I'll end up with a setup that looks like this. So this one has been taped on the 4 sides. So that completes the step number 6, or the first half of step number 6. The next step in step number 6 was to insert the lens. So the reason that we had this cut and these measurements made to these exact precise specifications is the lens that we're using is 38 millimeters in diameter. And so the way that this is set up, this lens will exactly fit into the holder and touch the bottom plate. So now the lens is stably supported in our holder. So we have this as our setup. The next step is to take part A, which has the transparency in it, and we're going to insert this into the sides underneath this flap that we've created to be able to have the transparency sit inside the V-groove. So we're going to insert this on the 2 sides so that this is now secured and holding our transparency. Some notes, so these rulers, this tells you the distance that the transparency is from the lens, and then we're going to place the flashlight into the lens holder. Now the flashlight comes off, you have to open it first and remove the battery protector. There's this piece of plastic that prevents the batteries from dying while it's in shipping. So after you've removed the transparent or the protector, then your flashlight will turn on. So now we're going to insert the flashlight into the transparency holder, and we can shine now through the transparency to the lens and project it onto the wall. So I'm going to have Ellis come and demonstrate the projection. Before I do that, I wanted to give a few safety points. First, keep in mind the lens is going to focus light, so this activity should never be done outdoors or in sunlight. So make sure that you keep the lens away from sunlight. Okay, so we're ready for Ellis, so we're going to turn off the lights.